Today's book review comes to us thanks to patron Final Gamer James. James wanted me to look at a somewhat unusual genre which, despite being unusual, is rather popular among children's and young adult books. Personally, I blame Redwall. The novel's title is The Oaken Throne, and it's the second book of the Deptford Histories trilogy. About the author. The Oaken Throne was written by Robin Jarvis, a prolific British author who was born in Liverpool in 1963. His official website doesn't have any biography information, but from what I could gather, he studied graphic design when he went to college, and he moved to London to work behind the scenes in television. Jarvis's writing career officially began when he published The Dark Portal in 1989. It came out 3 years after Redwall, so it was a pretty good time to create a high fantasy setting that features forest rodents, and seems to take place in the real world under the humans' noses. In Jarvis's case, the protagonists are what would eventually be known as the Deptford Mice, seeing as they're mice, and they live in the sewers of Deptford, a London district. The Dark Portal would lead to 2 more books in the Deptford Mice trilogy, and after that, Jarvis started to branch out. He's written more novels for the Deptford Mice universe than for any other, but he also writes dark fantasy and horror books in other settings that star actual humans. Today's book is the 5th entry in the Deptford Mice setting, part of the Deptford Histories trilogy. The story takes place centuries before the original trilogy and is unrelated to the first book in its set, which is why Final Gamer James suggested it, despite me not knowing this series existed before the request. The Oaken Throne came out in 1993, and since there's nothing more to say, I should get to the story. We start in a ruined tower in medieval London. The tower is home to a colony of bats, among them a young bat named Vespertilio, or Vesper for short. Vesper is upset because the last great battle against their enemies the squirrels is about to take place, and he's just barely too young to take part in it. It seems that Greenreach, a copse of trees in the center of the squirrel's religion and culture, will soon have its magical defenses removed, making it a perfect time to attack. We then shift over to Greenreach and follow Lady Morwenna, the traitor who will cause the breach. Morwenna is a servant of the Star Wife, the leader of the squirrels, and the person who maintains its defenses. Morwenna poisons the Star Wife with toad toxin, and before she's even dead, Morwenna uses a magical cloak to disrupt the defensive spell and let the bats start dropping tiny firebombs into Greenreach. However, the Star Wife isn't dead yet, and so she's able to use her magic to call to a peregrine falcon in a nearby baron's aviary. While Morwenna is busy, the Star Wife gives the magic amulet of her office a silver acorn to the falcon and has him fly off. Morwenna needs that amulet, so she tells the Bats' leader, General Rogar, that she needs the acorn to undo the spell that the Star Wife supposedly used to steal the Bats' powers of clairvoyance and start the Holy War. The Bats set off right away. Meanwhile, another group of squirrels, unaware of the Greenreach massacre, is celebrating the beginning of spring. In particular, the daughter of the ruling family Isabel is celebrating her coming of age. But then the bats catch up to the falcon and tear it to shreds right above the squirrel village. This causes the Star Wife acorn to fall right into Isabel's hands, and when the bats swarm down on the village, a traveling stoat jester named Wendell saves her life. The squirrel defenders fight off the bats despite their surprise, because the bats are tired and it's the middle of the day, but their queen realizes that they'll be back for the silver acorn at nightfall. As such, she declares that fate has decided that her daughter will be the Star Wife, and thus their entire army should travel to Greenreach to claim her new throne and recover the Holy Land. She also sends runners to the other squirrel communities, who will hopefully also send their armies. Of course, this leaves their home undefended, but this sacrifice must happen for the sake of all squirrels everywhere. As the squirrel army moves out, they happen across a wounded Vesper. Now Vesper decided to sneak out and join the army, but he was too late to join in the Battle of Greenreach, and he fell out of the sky from exhaustion when he tried to keep up with the group pursuing the falcon. He injured his wing in the fall, and so he's helpless when the squirrels find him. But since he's so young and saw no action, they decide to capture him instead of kill him. During the night, after the squirrels hear their hometown going up in flames, the group gets attacked by Hobber Raiders. Now, Hobbers worship Hob, the evil god of rats, along with his consort, Mob. They capture Isabel along with Vesper and a few other squirrels, and they prepare to sacrifice and eat them all while using the Silver Acorn's magic to resurrect their dark god. The Hobber High Priest manages to sacrifice 3 squirrels before one of them tricks their guard into letting him go. The squirrels then break free and fight through the massive worshippers to grab the Silver Acorn. But everyone except Isabel dies, and so she's forced to free Vesper since he's the only person who can help her escape. Isabel and Vesper manage to reach a stream blessed by the Green, the squirrel god of spring, and so the disguised Hobber High Priest can't approach them. He can, however, lay down a curse, and so he curses Vesper to die when surrounded by the clamor of bells, and he curses Isabel to die at the hands of the now escaping god Hob. He then leaves, and Isabel threatens Vesper at knife point to lead her to Greenreach. Oh yeah, and naturally it turns out that Lady Morwenna is working with the Hobbers too. Eventually Isabel has to sleep, and Vesper considers taking her knife and killing her with it. However, Vesper has never killed anyone before, and he can't bring himself to do it. Instead, he tries to get away, but when he hears a bell in the night, he panics. This lets Isabel wake up and catch up to him, and they both discover that the bell belongs to a blind leprous mole and the limping shrew who guides him. The mole is Giraldus, and the shrew is Tissel, and the two are on a pilgrimage to Greenreach. They're also stopping by all the holy sites along the way, and since it's not the most obvious route, Isabel and Vesper decide to join up with him. The next stop on the trip is the Orchard of Dwyer, supposedly planted by the Green itself. In fact, the Green visits Isabel in a vision that night. It tells her that the army is safe and moving to Greenreach. It explains that the Bat Moon Riders were deceived into warring with them, and it warns her that one of her companions may betray her. The next day, the group makes their way into the still frozen heart of the forest where the Green's strength is weakened. A group of Hobbers starts hunting them, and they chase the group in such a way as to lead them to the final holy site. The Hobbers back off when they reach it, but it's not clear why, because the site was desecrated long ago and obviously used for Hobber gatherings. Oh, and they just so happen to find the Jester Wendell nearby, because apparently both he and his cart managed to escape the Hobber raid, make it through Hobber territory alone, and end up next to a Hobber gathering place right when a Hobber hunting party decided to stop hunting Isabel's group for no particular reason. And no, none of the protagonists are in any way suspicious of Wendell. In fact, they follow Wendell's advice and end up sleeping next to a stagnant pond full of undead zombies. The group fight the zombies off and discover Wendell hiding far away from the water, but they're only angry with him because they think he's a coward. Meanwhile, Vesper's wing is healed, and he happens to hear a couple of Moonriders who are searching for Isabel, but he decides not to contact them because he's starting to question whether the squirrels really are responsible for the bat's loss of clairvoyance. Oh, and I guess he's falling in love with Isabel? Later that same day, the group gets captured by the Woodlanders, survivors of Hobber raids, who have banded together into a guerrilla army. At first, they think the travelers are Hobbers in disguise, but then they hear from a sage who lives in the depths of their hidden warren. The sage knows that the travelers are who they say they are, and he wants to speak to Vesper and Isabel. The sage turns out to be a hare called the Ancient, a holy figure in both the squirrel and bat religions. The hare confirms to Vesper that the squirrels weren't responsible for the loss of clairvoyance. Instead, it was the bat's own leader, Hrethral, who wanted to commit evil acts without being discovered. He blamed the squirrels, and thus also started the war. The Ancient then gives Vesper a pouch of incense that will draw all the bats to him when he burns it. Vesper will have to convince them on his own, however. Oh, and after this, Vesper and Isabel kiss. Meanwhile, Wendell has managed to set his own incense burning near an entrance to the Woodlander Warren, drawing the Hobbers to it. And when Tissel discovers the High Priest's disguise in his cart, Wendell murders him and hides the body. Giraldus and the others only have enough time to wonder who killed him when the Hobber army starts bursting in from all sides. The Woodlanders fight back, but Isabel and Vesper have to escape and get to Greenreach. Giraldus and Wendell go with them, and after Giraldus digs out a collapsed tunnel and the two main characters escape, Wendell reveals himself as the High Priest and stabs Giraldus. However, Giraldus manages to collapse the tunnel on himself and Wendell, and this also prevents the hoppers chasing them from reaching the protagonists. Vesper grabs Isabel and flies most of the way to Greenreach, but his strength gives out before they get there, and he gets attacked by a crow hopper. Isabel saves him and hides his unconscious body under some leaves, and that is when Morwenna happens by. She claims to be a survivor of the attack, and says that she's been hiding from the bats, but when she insists on leading Isabel to the holy oak tree right away, the bats guarding the entrance let the two pass right on by. This is so suspicious, even Isabel realizes something's up, but she still lets Morwenna guide her to a basement room full of squirrel-eating toads, grab the silver acorn, and then lock her in. Back with Vesper, he comes to some time after Isabel left, and he enters Greenreach just in time to watch the Moonriders begin their attack on Isabel's forces. He has no idea how to stop this from happening, because apparently he forgot about that pouch he got from the Ancient. However, he does somehow track Isabel down when he hears her screaming, and after he rescues her, he remembers the pouch and draws the bats to him. Vesper has no luck convincing the bats before the squirrels advance on their new position, but then Vesper kisses Isabel in order to confuse everyone long enough to listen to him. At this point, he manages to talk the bats into at least suspecting Grethel, but then Morwenna appears on a branch of the holy oak tree to gloat at the combined forces below, and hordes of hoppers show up to attack everyone. Isabel and Vesper climb the tree to confront Morwenna, who now reveals herself to be the High Priestess of Hobb's consort, Mob. Just then, Hobb himself bursts out of the ground and eats Morwenna since she still holds the silver acorn. This is apparently a fulfillment of Wendell's curse, even though he specifically named Isabel in it. Anyway, Isabel manages to grab the silver acorn before Hobb eats it, and although Hobb knocks down the oak tree, she manages to find the star glass, the other piece of the Star Wife's regalia. She then touches it with the silver acorn and officially becomes the new Star Wife. Using her new power, she traps Hobb in an acorn, and so long as any part of the oak tree that grows from it survives, Hobb will remain trapped. The hoppers continue fighting after this, but then squirrel reinforcements show up and end the Hobb threat. After the battle, but before the bats manage to defeat Grethel, Vesper returns to Greenreach. Isabel is about to formally become the new Star Wife, but Vesper suggests that instead the two of them should run away together and go to a distant land where people won't care that a bat and a squirrel are in love. Isabel turns him down, since the position is too important, but just before the ceremony begins, she changes her mind and runs back to Vesper. But she comes too late. While she was gone, Vesper accepted a poisoned drink from a mysterious hooded figure who turned out to be High Priest Wendell. And so, surrounded by rustling bluebells, which I really wouldn't call a clangor, Vesper dies, and the book ends. The analysis. I gotta be honest with you guys, I wasn't really that impressed with the Oaken Throne. I get what the author was trying to do with this book, I really do, but I just don't think he succeeded. The regular Deptford Mice setting takes place in the present day, or close enough to it, and so the Oaken Throne is a big change of pace. It takes place in the late medieval period, or the early Renaissance, and in keeping with that, the book is trying to be Shakespearean, in terms of its language and its plot. But Shakespeare isn't considered the best author of the English language just because he wrote flowery words and created plays full of high drama. Shakespeare was clever, both in his wordplay and in his plotting, and I did not get that same impression from the Oaken Throne. Now here, let me illustrate what I'm saying. I'll just read a passage at random from the Oaken Throne. Ninia glared at her husband, and her gaze smoldered with such furious rage that for a moment it seemed that she would strike him. Then the tension eased, and she quickly composed herself, but when she spoke, her tone was bitter and recriminating. "Is that the regard you hold for me?" she asked. "Do you truly believe I would spend my beloved's life so wantonly? Not easy is this for me, Silenus. The course I have chosen is perilous, yet there is no other. Does that sound like purple prose to you? Because that sounds like purple prose to me. Now I'll look up a random passage from my big book of Shakespeare plays. This is from Henry VI, Part 3. My crown is in my heart, not on my head, not decked with diamonds and Indian stones, nor to be seen. My crown is called content, a crown it is that seldom kings enjoy. That's just a taste of both their writing styles, but do you notice the difference? Because I can. Shakespeare chose his words to evoke images and metaphors, and to fit the mood of the character speaking. He didn't just use the fanciest synonym he could find, and he didn't just throw in adverbs that explain something the reader is already imagining. Those are the sins of purple prose, of making fanciness the point instead of the meaning behind the words. I can't speak about the rest of the Deptford Mouse books, but that's the impression I got from reading this novel. I also got the impression that Jarvis threw in these and thous entirely at random and doesn't know how to conjugate verbs for the second person singular. Then there's the fact that all of these characters are idiots. That's not Shakespearean either, that's just tiring. I can forgive the characters for not suspecting Wendell the Jester at first, but when he reappears just after the Hobbers call off their attack for no known reason, the only person who thinks he's vaguely suspicious is Vesper. Then there's the fact that the Green is very specific when it comes to the Bat's motivation and the Squirrel Army location, but very vague about which companion will betray her, even though it would know that Wendell is the High Priest, and it apparently knew that he would be joining them the next day, because none of her other companions ever betray Isabel. Then there's the whole ending. Isabel follows Morwenna even though she knows damn well that she's suspicious, and that she should be going up through the oak tree instead of down. Vesper completely forgets about the Ancient's gift right when he could have used it, and at the very end he drinks something pushed on him by a hooded figure whose face he can't see, even though he should be really distrustful of strangers by this point. I couldn't really get behind the Isabel-Vesper romance either, because the only indication we really get that it's happening is the fact that the purple prose changes its descriptors. Lastly, like I said during the summary, the curses really don't make good use of wordplay, even though both of them apparently come with a twist. So, while I will admit, I don't think the Oaken Throne is representative of the rest of the Deptford Mouse series, I can't really recommend reading it. Instead, I suggest you read one of Shakespeare's plays, or better yet, watch a stage production. You may not have all of the handy footnotes you get with a written version, but watching a play really is the best way to experience the bard's works. Take it from a person who's been in one. Thanks for joining me again for today's book review, and I hope I'll see you next time for a novel about fantasy spaceflight.